I'm not hearing it.
Sorry. Is there an on switch or something I don't see?
Mine's on if you want to use mine.
Yeah, these are.
These are on. Does that pull and close it?
Yeah. I think that one's not working. Are we okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, why don't you take that?
Hello?
Yeah.
Mine's working.
Yeah, yours is.
All right. Good morning and welcome to the Historic Site Preservation Board meeting, City of Palm Springs, California, Tuesday, June 13th, 2017. May we have the roll call, please?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair. Member Marsh is absent. Member Kaiser?
Here.
Member Dixon?
Present?
Member Lavoy is excused. Member Hayes?
Here.
Member Burkett?
Here.
And Chair Johns?
Here.
You have a quorum.
All right, thank you very much. And may we have the report on the posting of the agenda, please?
The agenda for this meeting was posted for public review at City Hall in the Bulletin Board, west of the council chambers, and at the Planning Department Services Counter in accordance with applicable law.
All right, thank you very much. Board, I'll accept a motion to accept the agenda.
Move to approve?
Second.
Got that, Ken?
Yep, and Mr. Chair, just a point of information, under discussions, item 3A, the material did not come for the presentation on the council dais update, so that will not have any staff report on it.
All right, thank you very much. No 3A. All right, ladies and gentlemen of the audience, this time has been set aside for public comment. You can address the board on any items of interest to you. We do have two public hearings today. No, we have one public hearing, so if you're here to address us on the Class 1 nomination of the Hayman residents, you can do so at that time. If you'd like to address us on any other issues, now would be a good time to do that. And Ken, is it 2 or 3 minutes now?
It'll be 3 minutes for
3
each
minutes,
speaker.
please. Please welcome. Good morning. Could you raise the mic just a little bit if you can, I think? Oh, Mr. Marsh is joining us.
Good morning, HSPB esteemed members. My name is Tracy Conrad, and I present myself here to you as the new president, the newly elected president of the Palm Springs Historical Society, and to receive your condolences as well as congratulations. I come to talk about the downtown plaza, and in hopes that HSPB will take the lead in making sure that we do deference to this historic portion of town. And I want to clarify some misconceptions that I've heard bandied about over the last few years about the Desert Inn gates. They are in the possession of Owen Kiley, not Tom Kiley, I believe, and he has offered them for loan to the city in perpetuity as long as they are displayed somewhere and pay homage to the Desert Inn. As well as there's a hillside vase that Westman Development is aware of that formed the center of the fountain that was in the dining patio of the Desert Inn, and that is preserved somewhere, I understand, and could also find a place in the public space. And also the Star of Nellie Kaufman, which was removed from the street in front of the Desert Fashion Plaza, which was the site of the Desert Inn. And all of those elements, I think, would contribute to the to the downtown space and to paying homage to the history of that important piece of ground. So I hope that HSPB will take the lead in making sure that we remember what was there. I think the Historical Society is keenly aware of it, and I'm sure other preservation organizations will also weigh in. So thank you, and thank you for your hard work.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Good morning.
Good morning, Historic Site Board. I'm Robert Imber. I'm going to speak on another item, agenda item, but I just wanted to take a moment relative to the work that you all do and things that we all care about so deeply to pay a little tribute to the late Bill Kreisel. So apropos to this group, architect Bill Kreisel, we all know, passed away about a week ago at age 92, having been instrumental in Palm Springs and done in 5 or 6 states, over 40,000 housing units, so it's throughout the country. So important to history, to architecture, to innovation and design, and how Americans and other people live, and how people come today to study and appreciate his work here in Palm Springs and beyond. So I just wanted to make sure that I came up here and paid a little tribute to our dear late friend, Bill Kreisel. Let me add to that. Obituaries and comments and on Facebook are all over the place, and filmmaker Jake Gorst, who did the documentary film on Bill Kreisel, has generously made it available online for free. So I want to bring that to people's attention if no one knows that the Bill Kreisel, the William Kreisel documentary is available online for a short time still. And just here's to our dear friend Bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Imber. Anyone else wishing to address the board this morning? Alrighty, seeing none, we'll close the public comment. Our first item on the agenda this morning, it is a public hearing, 1A. This is an application by William Stewart, owner, for Class 1 Historic Site designation of the Carl Haymond residence located at 1415 North Camino Centro, HSPB number 107. It's zoned R1A. Do I need to enter in the APN number?
No, not necessarily.
All right, thank you very much. The staff's recommendation is to open the public hearing and receive testimony. We'll do so. Oh, excuse me, staff report first. Thank you. Yes?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As noted in your staff report, this is an application by Bill Stewart for Class 1 Historic designation of the Carl E. Haymond residence located at 1450 North Camino Centro. The report, the Historic Resources report for this application was prepared for the homeowner by the Palm Springs Preservation Foundation. In your staff report, the staff report summarizes the information that is in the Historic Resources report, and the summary of it and the various findings against the criteria of the ordinance are found on pages 5 and 6 of your report, noting that it meets the criteria for the definition of a historic site, as well as meeting the criteria under item 3, which is the exemplifying a particular period in national, state, or local history, that being the modern period in Palm Springs. It also notes that it embodies the distinct characteristics of a period of time, and it also presents the work of Robson Chambers and Albert Frey, both architects as well as many others in the Palm Springs area at various times collaborated with one another in different combinations. And as noted in the Historic Resources report for this project, Frey and Chambers were credited with the design of the home. As noted on page 6 of your report, the integrity of the home and the site is considered very high. It's basically in its near original condition with very few minor modifications to the exterior. On page 7 of your report is a proposed list of what are the defining historic characteristics, and then as well the non-contributing elements. As the owner did walk you through the home in the past several weeks, he pointed out those modifications that he had made, as well as those that had been made by prior owners. And all of those, as noted in your staff report and in the Historic Resources report, are minor in terms of their impact on the overall historic integrity. So for the board's purposes for this morning, if it is determined as you make your deliberations on the Carl Heyman residence, if you believe that this is something that does meet the definition of a historic site, you will want to make that distinction in your resolution. We will bring that resolution back for you as a formal approval at the next HSPB meeting in July. That concludes my staff report. I'm available to answer any questions, and I believe the homeowner is here? No? But the folks from PSPF are here if there are further questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any questions of staff?
Nope.
All right, very good. We'll open the public hearing. Anyone in the audience wishing to address the board on this agenda item, please come forward. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Eric Rosenow, President of the Palm Springs Preservation Foundation. I am speaking on behalf of Mr. William Stewart, the owner of the Carl E. Heyman residence. He could not be here this morning. Mr. Stewart called upon PSPF to write the nomination for Class 1 historic designation. PSPF board members Ron and Barbara Marshall have prepared another stellar nomination, which you have had the chance to read. The home was designed by the firm of Frey and Chambers in 1963. Frey's work has become synonymous with Palm Springs, from the tramway gas station to City Hall to Frey's own home on the hill. A few years ago, a collection of Frey designs were nominated to the National Register of Historic Places. While not as well known, the Heyman residence is deserving of historic designation as well. It is full of typical Frey motifs, most notably metallic screens that provide both privacy as well as decorative touches. Beautiful terrazzo fills the spaces with large expanses of glass that blur the boundaries between the indoors and the outdoors. The nomination which you have read shows the numerous attributes that contribute to the relevance as a Class 1. The home has been beautifully restored by Mr. Stewart in the last year and has been showcased by the various architecture and design organizations in Palm Springs. On behalf of Mr. Stewart and my colleagues at PSPF, I urge you to vote to recommend Class 1 historic status to the City Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? All right, thank you very much. We'll close the public hearing. Board?
Mr. Chair, I
Please.
found this property to be in prime condition. I mean, they fully took advantage of all of the features that have been preserved over the years, and there have been a number of features in the house that have been preserved, and I think they did an exquisite job with what they did to the home, inside and out. So, I mean, I would highly recommend we move forward with the designation.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I agree. I think it's a wonderful job. They even kept the old jalousie windows, which is questionable from an energy standpoint, but it's quite remarkable. And they're all in working condition, so.
All right, Linda, would you like to turn your recommendation into a motion, please?
Yes, I would like our board to adopt Resolution HSPB 107, a resolution of the Historic Site Preservation Board of the City of Palm Springs, California, recommending that the City Council designate the Carl E. Heyman residence located at 1415 North Camino Central as a Class 1 historic site. And I would refer to the defining historic characteristics listed on page 7.
Second.
Todd Hayes was the second. Ken? Any further discussion on this? I think we're all in agreement that this is a really wonderful example of a collaboration between Robson Chambers and Albert Frey. And for a research geek like myself, I love seeing the title block here included in the nomination, and the nuance that the RC, the initials RC, were there as he checked the drawings. So, any further discussion?
Mr. Chair?
Please.
I just am so thrilled that this homeowner took advantage of what was there. I mean, he looked for a property that he could restore, and he did that. He didn't change out things, for instance, the windows or the tiles around the patio. He really took the features that were original and he worked with them. And I think this is a prime example of what can be done to some of the homes that we see that they come in and they want to tear them down and do something else. This was just outstanding.
Thank you. Mr. Marsh?
Well, I'll support everyone in that. When I first arrived at the site and I looked at the screens, I thought, my God, this is Chicago, Louis Sullivan, screens. And then I found out it was kind of a derivative of the screens and that they had purchased more from Denver and installed them on the house. And it is an exceptionally significant property, and it does meet all the criteria in terms of architecture and events and design and characteristics of the interior and exterior, as everyone has said, that have pretty much remained intact. So I strongly support and recommend nomination of the property.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh.
Yes. I particularly was intrigued with the fact that they kept the Geneva cabinets in the kitchen. With a house of this scale, of this, and knowing, the price ranges that they're in, they're often tempted to rip all of those things out. But they are, they beautifully restored, they're beautiful condition. But also the effort they went with finding on the screens, those beautiful screens, which are encased on the outside, but then to be able to find those panels in Denver that are replicated exactly of that design onto the gates. Was it amazing? I mean, those things don't just happen without effort. So this is something that I think we can all be very proud of, that it in our community for historic preservation for certain.
All right.
I'll just add, I couldn't agree more with everything that everybody said, especially with the windows and respect to the screens and all that. The other thing is I think it's imperative that we save properties like this, because it really is. I know a little bit about Albert Frey, and as an example of his work, it is truly, I still, in going over this house, it's like, this is an Albert Frey.
Yeah.
And it's imperative that we save every example that we can to show the breadth and range of an architect's work, and we're blessed by having so much of his work here. And this is a very unusual work of his, and it is a later work of his, and it's imperative that we save it so for future people can understand the range of work that he did, and from that standpoint alone, it's absolutely worth saving. So, yeah, kudos to the people who worked on this.
I agree. So we have a first and a second. No further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Thank you very much. And a great staff report on that, too. Thank you. All right, our next item on the agenda is new business. This is 2A. This is a certificate of approval application by Sequoia Architects to establish a sign program for Captor Plaza, a multi-tenant commercial complex located at 600, 650, 700, and 750 East Tockwitz Canyon Way, zoned REO, case SP 17-005, HSPB number 97. This is a Class 1 historic site. David.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and board members. Let me just pull up the sign program that you have before you. So as the new owners have taken over ownership of properties here, they've prepared the sign program in conjunction with Mr. Captor and Susan Sequoia Jensen and Architects to establish the signage that would be permitted moving forward for the complex. And what they've done is they put together basically a package that includes various types of signage. Specifically, you're looking at a monument sign, one monument sign situated at along the frontage here perpendicular to Tahquitz Canyon Way. It's identified as number 1 here on this site plan, in between the 2 pairs of buildings. They're also requesting tenant wall signs, 1 on each building for the buildings fronting Tahquitz, and then the corner building on Calle El Segundo and Tahquitz would have a second sign for tenant identification. Each of these signs would be 24 square feet in size and would be pin-mounted letters with halo illumination attached to the stucco surface. They are also proposing window signage. Each would be 3 square feet for each tenant at their entry. And then finally, they are proposing a directory sign. What I have as an additional exhibit for you today is the applicant has prepared a rendering of what the proposed monument sign would look like along the street here in Tahquitz. And they've also given us some elevations showing the directories as they would be installed in between the breezeways. So for 3 of the buildings, the directories would be installed on the tile surfaces, and then on the 750 building, it would be installed on the stucco surface in between the breezeway areas. When staff looked at this proposed sign program, we evaluated against the sign ordinance, which is section 9320, and noted on page 3 of your report where the program was not conforming. The one instance where this program is not conforming to the zoning code is the height of the monument sign. The height is proposed at 12 feet overall from the surface to the top, and the sign ordinance limits monument signs to 8 feet in height. So they're requesting a deviation for the overall height. However, when we looked at the findings for issuance of certificates of approval, we believe that the proposed program does meet these guidelines when evaluating it, the proposed sign program for the 3 that are required for issuance of the certificate of approval. So specifically, the height of this monument sign would allow less signage on the building, and so therefore it may be justified to be a taller monument sign. Again, there is only 1 monument sign for the 2 properties, so that is not a proliferation of signage for the properties. And again, the proposed monument sign is located on a lower elevation than the adjacent landscape areas, which are elevated with the adjacent to the retaining wall. So again, some justification there. As far as looking at how the sign program impacts the historic value, under the findings, we felt that there are limited areas that signage would be proposed. The areas where it potentially could impact the historic significance would be on the stucco surfaces. We do believe that those surfaces, when signage is removed and replaced, can be repaired and painted to match the adjacent surface. So that is something that we looked at when we evaluated the program. With that, I'll conclude my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions. We do feel that the monument sign by itself does complement the architecture and would be preferable for this type of project. So that concludes my presentation. I can answer any questions. The applicant is also here to provide any information that the board may, or answer any questions that the board may have. Thank you.
David. David, thank you. Any questions of David before we ask the applicant to come forward? David, I have a question. On the diagram you had in front of us here showing the parking areas, that one, please, yeah. It is number 1 denotes the monument sign. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. In this paperwork you just passed by, it appears that, sorry, it appears that the monument sign is in landscaping. Is that a landscaped area?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Would the applicant like to come forward?
Thank you.
My name is Hugh Capter, along with Soyo Architects. We have examined the site, and fortunately, the two projects are now under one ownership. At one time, we thought of putting a monument sign here and here, and then it was decided to, since it's under one ownership, to join the two properties by eliminating the wall that's between the parking that goes, and now there's trash containers on both sides. We would remove those and put the trash containers here, and then tie the two properties together with an auto passageway here. Now, if you're in this project and you find out you want to be in that project, you have to go out back onto Tahquitz, back around. And this way it ties the two together. And by doing that, we eliminated two monument signs, and by making this now the main entrance in and out, we're proposing the one monument sign in this location. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them, and I think, Susan, you may have something to say.
While Susan's coming up, Hugh, I had a question. David made a note about this is 12 feet, and 8 feet is pretty much the prescribed or allowed?
That's correct.
Okay. Hugh, I assume that you felt the extra height was more relatable to the building scale?
Yes, we thought instead of having two smaller signs and that we would go with the one larger monument sign. And at one time, I had proposed 3 different concepts, and everybody seemed to like the concept that's being presented. So that's how we determined that.
All right. Susan?
Thank you, and we have worked with you very closely on this proposal, and it is a matter of just continuing the legacy of what the buildings were originally meant to be. We're trying to keep the signage understated, yet effective, and so therefore that's what we have presented to you. We're going with the dark anodized bronze, which was the original design, and I do have an elevation of the original plans if you need to see that. But overall, just keeping in character with the original design. There are currently, the building numbers are on there as a dark anodized, but all 3 building numbers that you can see from Tahquitz Canyon are different. And so we're suggesting that we stick with the 700 building numbers, which are in your packet. They seem to be the cleanest, almost Neutra style font, and we're trying to replicate that with the rest of the building design. So we're here to answer any questions.
All right, no questions? All right, thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
Board, discussion?
Oh,
Please.
Scott Timberlake, property owner, would like to say something?
Please, yes, Mr. Timberlake.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out that having Hugh involved in this has been a pleasure. It's nothing I would have designed or even thought of coming up with, so that credit goes to him. But I think what's also very important that was mentioned, but I think not pointed out clearly enough, these buildings are all raised up from ground level about almost 3 feet due to a retaining wall in front. So Hugh, when he mentioned this to me, he said, well, you know, the normal place is to put one monument sign in front of each building, which makes sense. Well, with the 8-foot allowance, that 8 feet starts 3 feet above sidewalk level. So you're still looking at an 11-foot sign. So Hugh's idea was to bring it down to ground level, so not only it's more visible, but still keep within the height restrictions, the massivity of the 2 buildings together. So if this, for any reason, is considered too high, we would go back to 2 11-foot signs, which I think is the wrong direction. That's all.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Board, any questions?
Mr. Chair?
Please.
I do have a question. Susan mentioned the simplicity of the 700 East font, and then we see these other fonts. Is the sign itself going to be the simple 700 font, or is it going to be one of these fancier?
The sign itself is going to be similar to the 700.
Okay.
And we've yet to bring in a sign company, and that's where we really start to get into the detail with the various tenants and so forth. But we are proposing the simplicity of the 700.
Simple font?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Vincent, I'm sorry, I didn't see you.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question of staff?
Absolutely.
So can you explain to me when there's a deviation in the sign ordinance and that this signage is going, the blade sign is going to be bigger than the code allows, are there any other kind of approvals that are needed? Like, does it have to go to the planning commission, or does staff do that approval based on our recommendation?
So the sign program does have to go to the Planning Commission for action, particularly because it is requesting the deviation. So in those instances, it does go to the Planning Commission. So it's kind of a two-part process. HSBB would have to issue a certificate of approval. The program would also have to receive approval from the Planning Commission.
Okay.
Okay. Todd?
I'm concerned about the monument sign. I'm concerned about the height of the monument sign. I'm concerned about the scale of the monument sign. I'm not convinced that two smaller ones wouldn't be a better solution. First off, I think we need to think long and hard before we set a precedent of overriding the sign ordinance that we have and becoming a city that oversigns everything. I absolutely am behind this project's adaptive reuse, and I want to see it successful, and I understand what a critical part signage plays in that. I'm concerned about and not convinced that it needs to be that height. I wish we had seen that rendering before today. I myself would like to, or I guess ask the question if there's a way for us to see, I don't need to see a whole mock-up of the sign in that site, but if I could at least see posts that represent the height of that on both north and south, so I could drive by and see what relationship that scale is to the building. That would be very helpful. I'm also concerned when you're looking at that drawing behind me or in front of me, the driveway, I'm assuming those are parking places in that's a driveway, that's a north and a right side driveway, so they'll be driving in and out of so that monument sign for the people who are exiting the project on the left-hand side, they're going to be facing oncoming traffic from the left-hand side, and that monument sign is going to effectively block their view. And so I'm concerned about a safety issue also, and whether or not that monument sign is going to block people from leaving that driveway and being able to see the oncoming traffic. So that's also of a concern to me. And so I think it just needs to be reviewed a little bit more, and I would like to see more detail before I could really get behind it. Thanks.
Anyone else? Linda?
A question of staff. Staff, Todd brings up a very interesting point about the traffic. Have you done any studies? Have you looked at it with that sign being positioned where it is, and whether there will be any obstruction?
What we haven't done is reviewed it with the traffic engineer to make sure there's no issue. But one thing to note is that the sign is set back behind the sidewalk, which is a pretty deep sidewalk. It's an 8-foot sidewalk. So as vehicles would exit, they would have some buffer there to move into kind of the sidewalk area and then into the traffic area before, and being able to see the traffic along Tonquist before exiting the property.
Mr. Chair, may I continue?
Please.
You said you didn't review it with traffic.
The traffic engineer.
Well, does that need to be reviewed with traffic before we even see it? What if traffic says it doesn't give enough visual guidance? I mean, is the cart before the horse right now with
No,
The size?
we would review it prior to issuance of permit, so it would be something that, it wouldn't, if you took action today, it wouldn't preclude it from moving forward. It may have to be moved slightly to address any traffic concerns, so maybe it would be pushed further back, but it would not be precluded from action today.
Thank you.
David, would you review for me, please, the setback from the curb? You said the sidewalk is about 8 feet, and then this is another 3 feet back from there?
Approximately, right,
Okay.
yes.
And the design of the sign does sort of recede back, so it does have it does have an opening. I'm not sharing the same concern about there being a traffic hazard or a blocked sight line.
Yeah, we feel that there would be adequate space to install a sign of this size in that location. Again, it may have to be slightly moved, from one area to another, but the general size of the landscape buffer there would be adequate for this type of sign.
Does the final word on the variance from the current sign ordinance fall to the Planning Commission?
Correct. Right. So essentially what the HSPB today is looking at is how the program impacts historical value. And those are the findings that we had in your staff report, which we responded to on pages 4 and 5.
One other question that I had, and I hope I'm not embarrassing myself. Looking at the different elevations, Captor Plaza comes from the top down, and then on the other, it's Captor Plaza from the bottom up. Am I the only one seeing that?
No, you're right.
I mean, would they be the same? Could I ask the applicant?
It's the way you read.
So on the left side of the page 3 of the program, so that would be your view as you are traveling westbound on Tockwitz.
Okay.
So on the right side, you're looking at the east, if you're traveling eastbound. So that the left side would be, we could not be, wouldn't be, you could not reverse it the other direction because it wouldn't read correctly.
Help me.
You're not embarrassing yourself. We've actually had this discussion internally, and if we can get it to read Captor Plaza from bottom to top on both sides, we would prefer to do that. However, it is one of those things where when we really get into it with the sign company, we'll have to look at what is the most logic placement of the type. But that's not an embarrassing question. That's something that we're exploring.
Okay. Any other Mr. Captor?
No, I think that's a good point, and we would be happy to do some sightline studies. And if you look at the sign, the mass of the sign projects over the base, so the base of the sign is cut back, and maybe we may cut that base back a little farther, depending on our sightline studies.
Okay. Any other questions or discussion?
I have a question.
Linda?
Is the whole project 700, or is it 700 and?
600.
Each building is addressed
It's
separately.
Separately?
Yes.
So
It's-
each building will have the
The
number
address.
on it?
Mhm.
Will there be an address on the monument sign?
No,
There will not.
and not at this time unless the applicant would clarify otherwise, but no.
Does the city, in their ordinance, have any stipulation that the address has to be on the signage? I mean, what I find in the city is that we're so inconsistent when you're driving and you're looking for a location. In some cases, you're looking at the building, in some cases, you're looking at the sign, and when you're driving, that could be a dangerous situation. So I'm curious to know what the city requires. Do they require on a monument sign as well as a building, or is a building extra and it has to be on the sign?
My understanding of our requirements is that the fire department has specifications that, an address numbers are installed on your building, and they have to be a minimum size to be visible from the street. The signs that they're proposing on the buildings would conform to that, but if they were to add additional address information on the monument sign, that's not something that we would necessarily oppose or require, though.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Please, Dick.
I just have a question, also the applicants. Would it be present a marketing challenge if the sign were, let's say, compromised at 10 feet? Would be my first question, and then at the typical 8-foot. Obviously, I'm sure you've given that consideration. You wouldn't be asking for the 12-foot, but and I think you find this board certainly is very sympathetic to this particular project. I think it's one of the most remarkable things that's happened since I've been in the city for going on 13 years, that I've seen something that nearly went away, and then how it all came back together. I just can't keep complimenting all of
Yourself.
you involved. No, not myself.
This board.
The board, but also everybody working together. This is truly one of the best examples that's ever happened. So I'm only asking this question for your consideration because there is some sensitivity, I know, like which Todd brought up, and I think everybody's sensitive about scale and height and so forth. So would there be any, in your minds, a consideration for some way working together where this sign wouldn't have to be 12 foot?
My answer is no. The sign was designed by the original architect who's sitting here with us today. And if you think anyone else is more or less qualified to determine scale or height, you got another thing coming to you. This height, this scale, this design was by Hugh Capter himself to complement the building he originally designed. So therefore, I don't think anything trumps that. So no, I'm not open to compromises that Hugh was not comfortable with.
Thank you. I say, with my respect to Mr. Capter, then I really appreciate your sharing that, and the fact that obviously he feels that the scale isn't, and I would never be one to try to second guess what he felt was the best, the best scale for this. But I just felt I had to ask for the purposes. I know there's a little bit of concern to see if there's a way we could work together. So I greatly appreciate the input.
Anyone else?
Mr. Chair?
Please.
Again, to staff, I wonder, based on some of the suggestions here, if the applicant would consider putting the range of the address at the base of the sign so that you know that this is more than one building, i.e. that it's 600 to 750. So when you're driving, you immediately know that you're at the right location. It's something to consider.
Absolutely. The addresses were dictated by the fire marshal and what their requirements are. But I have another building at 350 Indian where I chose to also put the addresses on there, and I think it's very helpful. So I actually would prefer to see the addresses on the sign and on the building. I'm so limited with 32,000 square feet of vacant office space to be giving away signage. I'm having a difficult time reaching. It's critical that this property succeed, especially due to publicity. So to add the address at the base of the sign, absolutely. To shorten the sign or restrict tenant size, tenant awareness, very unfavorable to the project. The success of it is so important, and the resistance I'm getting from prospective tenants because no one knows they're there, and there's no way to identify their presence, is really becoming a problem. And of course, that leaves us with an empty building. Doesn't look good like that. But yes, I'm all for the address being on the side.
Flynn? Oh, I thought you were turning your mic on.
I'd like to mention also, off the rear parking, where the breezeway between the two buildings, there will be a small directory sign that would have the different addresses on. So,
Okay. All right.
Can I just add something?
Please, Todd.
So I certainly appreciate the design of the sign. I think it absolutely captures the original design of the building, and I am absolutely sympathetic to the owner's need to lease the spaces. I don't feel comfortable with the sign the way it is. I think I'm concerned about the precedent that it sets for future developments. I also don't really understand the scale of the sign with respect to its placement. And I think the only way for me personally to approve it is to understand better the scale and the placement. I also think that they're, even turning the sign so the tall part is away from the street and the short part is at the street. I think there are other possible solutions that might be feasible that I haven't seen explored. And so that's my reticence with the way that it's presented to us today. Thanks.
Okay. Any further discussion? I'm going to make a motion that we approve as submitted.
Second.
Further discussion? We'll go to take a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
I'll abstain.
Ken, you got that?
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all very much. Number 3 on our agenda is discussions. We've removed 3A from the agenda, and we are now at 3B. This is a presentation on Howard Lapham by Member Burkett.
Well, when the demo request for the Crocker Bank came before our board, my curiosity was heightened to learn more about the designer, Howard Lapham. I was familiar, of course, with the Desert Star project, which our board recommended as a Class 1 site and was approved by the City Council. And I was also familiar with the Rackstrom building. But I didn't really know a whole lot more about his work. So I set out on a research quest, which led me to the museum's A&D Center archives, where I met with Frank Lopez, who gave me some great assistance. And then I went over to the Historical Society and met with Renee Brown, and then to Palm Springs Life with Julie Rogers for some additional insight. I also reached out to Robert Ember. I was totally amazed at what I found. It was obvious that Mr. Lapham enjoyed a stellar career in Greater Palm Springs area, but that he had gained very little attention. I took the rough draft of the PowerPoint that I put together and handed it to Richard Hubble and asked him to please apply his magic, and indeed he did. Even though I had the information there, I had the placeholders for the images. He put on the final touches. And he will be here, by the way, in July to express his comments, read Mr. Lapham, and also the Crocker Bank project. So today, I've asked Robert Imber if he would come up. He had a very close relationship with Mr. Lapham, and we all know that I figured there would be some tidbits that Robert would share with us. He's very well known for doing that. So I want you to feel free to interject at any time. So let's just talk a bit about Mr. Lapham's career. He was born in Oklahoma City, and he was actually a architectural designer versus an architect. So he came to Palm Springs in '54, and it's amazing. It didn't take him very long to settle into the community, where he started designing some homes for the very wealthy clientele and for the movie elite. And he was the one that really was the initial, evidently, architect that did a lot of work in Thunderbird Country Club. And one of the things Robert did a very lengthy interview with Mr. Lapham, and in reviewing that, it was interesting to learn that the lots at Thunderbird in the early 60s were 12 grand. And if you were willing to be more near the street, they were 7 grand. So how things have really changed. So he did a lot of work up in Thunderbird, which we're going to see. And he was with us until he was age 92. So
Bill, if I can...
When I went down to the Architectural Design Museum and we started doing this research, we started pulling out a lot of Architectural Digest. And you know, back in the 60s and the 70s, Architectural Digest was really a major publication. We didn't have all of the other shelter magazines that we know that we have today. But just some things that particularly caught my eye and went through there was the Hyatt Von Den residence. This is actually the founder of the Hyatt Hotels up in Thunderbird Heights, the Hewitt residence, the Clark Swanson, then over in Palm Desert, the Morrow residence, and then he also did the remodel of the Thunderbird Country Club clubhouse. So the one project that we are all very familiar with, of course, is the Desert Star. And if you'll notice that he did this in '56, so that means he was only here for 2 years. So pretty amazing that he would be commissioned to start this kind of a project that early in his career here. And then the Manzanita House in Deepwell. This, of course, is known for its asymmetrical lot position and the glass with the stone facade. The Chi-Chi room is probably, I guess, would be one of the most notable of all the things that he did in town. But when you look at the intricacy of the detailing on that block and the bold blue color, I'm sure that was quite, particularly back then, that was quite an avant-garde thing to see. Here's some great images that I found when I was at the A&D Museum. On the left is the rendering of the Starlight Room, and then on the far right and the bottom is actual photograph of the space. And then the Rackstrom Building up on 666 North Palm Canyon, which is just as you see it here, as you see it today. And then on his Sachiba project that he did of the movie colony, a couple months ago, the A&D Council of the museum had an event there, so many of us were able to go and experience that property. It really exemplifies, I think, how massive his work was. I mean, when he did a project, he wasn't working, evidently, from anything I've seen, with 12 and 1,500-foot homes. He was doing things on a, on a very grand scale. And I think this photo of the 60-foot long living room with the original terrazzo floor, along with Arthur Elrod's major sofa there, you can see, and several Carl Springer pieces in the home, which was great for me to see. You don't see that Carl's work that around that much anymore. And then another great project that I think he's very well known for is the Ichba Mayapan, or should be well known for, I should say. This was, obviously, he was very inspired by Mayan architecture, and he put his own spin on the Mayan revival style. Those doors, the front doors are 14 feet tall, and we're going to see other examples of how that Mayan architecture detail was in some of his other buildings. So this is also known as the Cookhouse. It's 11,000 square feet. And again, he did a Mayan calendar at the entrance courtyard, and the keystone-shaped pool with the colossal size Mayan-inspired figure. Michael Smith, while he was out here designing and working on the Sunnylands for the Visitor Center, he became captivated with the Ichba Mayapan house, and of course he eventually purchased the home, which is now, as we know, is where the Obamas have been staying on all of their visits out here in Palm Springs. And just a little side note on that, I was very fortunate enough to represent Michael Smith's furniture lines in our New York and our Chicago showrooms when I had showrooms for the interior design trade. Here's some more interesting, intricate detail of how he used that, again, that Mayan inspiration. The Kramer House, this is going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to show you here up in Thunderbird Heights. This is obviously the client asked for indeed a lot of color, and Steve Chase did the interiors. And you'll notice the mirror ceiling, how it even exaggerated all of that design and color as well. And there are a lot of other photographs that we could have used, but we were trying to keep this short. This was just an amazing project. The Bank of America, which is another part of the anchor over at Smoke Tree Plaza, down towards the east end. And here you can see that Mayan-inspired detailing coming out again. This was done in '76. And he actually did this in also along with Richard Harrison on this particular project. And then the Crocker Bank, which is the subject property that we are working on now. It's the recent photo of that project. And it's interesting when you can see how the three banks along East Palm Canyon how they really are, they're different, but how they all work in unison. When you start with the Crocker Bank at the corner there, of Sunrise and East Palm Canyon, and you work your way east, and you have the Union Bank, which I've not done the research to find out who, somebody else might know who did that. And then you go down to the Bank of America, and you can really see the sort of the symmetry, I guess you would even say, of how these all work together. Another interesting thing I found when I was at the A&D Museum is I found these wonderful renderings of what he did for his concept of Museum Square. And you will notice the scale of this. There is nothing more than 2 stories high. It would be interesting to have experienced what it would have been like if that's what indeed would have been built. But evidently I understand, again, I saw this in the interview Robert did, that he carried these plans with him all over town, that anybody he could catch their eye with, he presented these plans to. He was really moved for a master plan. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I just want to show you some of the, to sort of emphasize here how prolific this gentleman really was and all of the projects that he did. I'll just pick out 1 or 2. The Skylark Hotel expansion. Again, in that interview that Robert did, he put a little quib at the end on his Skylark Hotel expansion that it is now he called it a gay hotel. And this was back, I guess this interview would have been in the 80s.
Well, the interview was 2005.
Right, yeah. And then the other one was the Greyhound bus depot, which is now no longer Woody's, but is now a smoke shop, I understand. And that's another one that I think was really quite noteworthy as well. And it did the North Shore Club actually up in Lake Tahoe. And here, the Palm Springs National Bank, which now is the Marquis Performing Arts. Before that, I think it was Mitchell Gold, and I'm not sure what it was before that. That was another one that I thought was really quite interesting. And the fact that he and Harrison did all of Smoke Tree Village. And when you think about Smoke Tree Village being done back at that time in the 60s, and how relative it still is today, I think, and how that works. So it wasn't just the bank that he did, the 2 banks actually, it was also being involved with the whole Smoke Tree Village. Looks like you want to say something, Robert.
Well, I usually want to say something. I think we know that. There's so much to add. Thanks for inviting me to participate a bit here. Speaking of Smoke Tree Ranch Shopping Center, just the story of that, above and beyond the architecture, is extraordinary. He had done condominium tower in Omaha, Nebraska for Mrs. Swanson of Swanson Frozen Foods, who had a place at Smoke Tree. And there was this parcel of land down on the highway, Highway 111, in front, and it was kind of what to do with it. And it was really Howard who kind of pitched the idea to do not a shopping center, because as he says in the interview from 2005, we had enough retail already in Palm Springs, and but he wanted to create kind of a what's it called, like a what's the word I'm looking for? A farmer's market feeling, and you see there's kind of a woodsy feeling to Smoke Tree Shopping Center. But then it needed on the highway anchors, And he did, I believe, that Union Bank building, and he did the bank building in question here. Further down to Bob's Big Boy, which was later Coco's, which is now empty, and created this incredible sense of balance and quality and architecture and new ideas in those properties in front of and as part of Smoke Tree Ranch Shopping Center. And I had the privilege to know Howard towards the end of his life. We have about 2 hours of interview of him that from 2005 that were for Desert Utopia, film where I was executive producer. And it's just remarkable, the volume of his influence. And I think it's so important to note that it wasn't just architecture. I mean, I think he will come along to be considered an exceptional, if not master architect, once the body of work is understood. But his legacy, if you ask him, was really redevelopment and water agency things and shopping centers and the business side of it all. He even jokes that he kind of came back after working for Harry Williams and Stuart Williams in the early years. He kind of begrudgingly came back to design because he was really more interested in development. And so he pursued in his early career here, from beginning to end, just a remarkable impact on the community, both development and redevelopment and finance and certainly architecture and design. So his work, though so much lesser known than so many, is the simple volume of it throughout the valley, but particularly in Palm Springs, is truly extraordinary and exceptional. You know, I'm reminded, Hugh Captor being here this morning, I'm reminded sort of a personal anecdotal reference. You know, when I first moved here almost 20 years ago, I always, as some may know here, always involved with architectural education and research, and was involved with the people bringing out the names Stuart Williams and Donald Wexler and doing some education and creating Modernism Week and all these things that are now so known to us all. But kind of looking at the big picture and looking ahead, I researched the name Outcalt, and I researched the name Captor, and I researched the name Lapham 20 years ago, or 15 years ago. And these were complete unknowns. And I remember across the street here, the first moment I met Hugh Captor, we made an appointment, and I called him up. I said, hey, my name is Robert Imber. I'm interested in architecture. Your name came up on a piece of paper somewhere, and can we meet and talk? And he said, sure, meet me there on Sunrise Way, whatever street it is, and we'll drive around, I'll show you my projects. And I spent about 3 hours with Hugh at the first meeting from just feet from here, learning about him. But the point I'm making is he was a complete unknown. He was just another great architect in this town who came to make a difference, and about whom we now know, who was just here giving public comment on important saved work of his. And Howard Lapham is like that today. Howard Lapham is not a known name to so many, but the volume of his work again, the impact economically and historically and architecturally and quality and scale in this community is truly, truly extraordinary. And then you factor in best friends with Bing Crosby and work house he did that Debbie Reynolds bought. And as he says in the interview, that guy, what's his name? Disney, Walt Disney, the people with whom he worked in terms of the history. It so speaks, Howard Lapham's work so speaks to the mandate of the HSPB and the importance of our history here. I think that's enough for now.
Thank you so much. I just want to close by thanking the staff for allowing us to do this, as well as preparing all the documentation of the PowerPoint as well, and for encouragement of Mr. Johns to do this as well. And I think that now we all have a little bit better understanding of his work. It's been a great pleasure to do this project.
Dick, I have a question. The Pecky cypress, is that a material that Howard Lapham used a lot, or I'm just curious as to, or if there is some correlation?
This is actually one of Mr. Hovell's creations, and I
Okay.
did question it.
Okay, no, I just wasn't sure whether maybe.
But now
he-
I'm intrigued, so I'm going to ask him.
If he had used a lot of it. Well,
Yeah.
Dick, when you sent this to me, and I think it's fantastic. I think that, as Robert just mentioned, Howard Lapham is the next architect that we haven't known much about, but and unfortunate, sometimes the work has to be threatened for it to come to our attention. I think you've done a wonderful job here of raising the awareness on Mr. Lapham's work.
Thank you.
Okay.
I second that, and I hope that staff keeps this very close to their heart, and anytime we have a project with this gentleman, that we get a copy of this as a reminder of his fine work.
Yeah. And Dick, I think you said that there was a lot more material that you could have, this could have been much more expanded.
Yeah.
So maybe you might think about expanding this and doing it as a part of Modernism Week or the HSPB's event next year, along those lines. Robert?
Yeah, well, just to augment that, there's endless material. Some of it is anecdotal and from people who knew him, and there are some materials, and certainly at the sources that Dick mentioned. But the point really is that I've used the word now so many times, the volume of this man's work is extraordinary, and the impact on our history and our architecture, again, our quality of life and the economic development and redevelopment of Palm Springs is tremendous. And so so I hope that, of course, HSPB and staff and people who learn about Howard and his work, recognize and appreciate that in their evaluations. And, this bank building that is having a new proposal is, may be threatened, but I like to kind of turn that word threat into opportunity, because that building, I don't know anyone except some vegan and vegetarian friends who wouldn't mind an In-N-Out burger in town. Now that may be the hot button political thing to say, but you know what? An In-N-Out burger in that building, I think, would probably be okay and retain everything that exists at that corner historically and architecturally. I don't eat meat, but I know a lot of people who would drive through there and pick up their burger.
Robert, thank you very much. Dick, anything further, board questions or comments for Dick? All right, Dick, thank you very much.
Of course.
All righty, the final item on our agenda, next item on our agenda, 3C. This is the discussion of the inclusion of historic artifacts in the design of the new downtown park. I did ask Flynn to put this on our agenda today for a discussion. As Tracy pointed out earlier this morning, the Historical Society is 100% in favor of this. I wanted this board to voice a strong request of the city to no longer to consider this, but now to require it as a part of the downtown park. The Palm Springs Preservation Foundation has also written a letter in support of the memorializing of the Desert Inn and Nellie Kaufman to the city. That'll be on record soon. There are a number of elements, as we know, the gates, the original gates to the Desert Inn. I'm sorry, I meant to bring some photographs of those gates today. They're quite large. They're very impressive, and they do exist. Tracy mentioned some other items that are still extant somewhere. The star for Nellie Kaufman was on the Walk of Stars. There was also a boulder, quite a large marker from the county of Riverside memorializing the Desert Inn. So I don't think that I'm asking the support of this board to create something that didn't already exist. Much of this did exist, and now we have an opportunity to create a new public space downtown, and I feel very strongly that these items, or new items or similar items, should be included in the downtown park.
Mr. Chair, let me just
Please.
follow up with your comments. What I would recommend that the board do is that you provide a letter to our city council. We'll also provide a letter to the consultant who is working on the park with your recommendations. I've drafted a letter for you. I would just ask that, Mr. Chair, perhaps if you could mark that up with your comments. And once you're done with that, we'll go ahead and forward that on to the city council.
All right,
and
I'd
the
like that very much.
consultant.
But I'd also ask the board's input on what we might also ask for in the request to the city. Todd, sorry.
So, thank you for bringing this up. I couldn't agree more. I'm sorry, Tracy left, I think. But I would love to certainly see all of these items put in there someplace. I don't know if the park, unfortunately, is the only option we have at this point. The gate posts would be great if they were at some entrance point to the project, you know, and so like just sticking to gate posts in a random space inside the park seems like a lost opportunity to me. If there's some way to put them like at the corner of a driveway and use them somewhere that is appropriate to how they were originally used in the project, I think like because those are the ones that were on Palm Canyon, right? Yeah, so it might not be possible to put them back on Palm Canyon. That would be ideal. That might not be possible, but certainly, you know, maybe since the park does encompass that street in the back, if they were placed on either corner at the entrance to that street where the park is on both sides of, you know, I would love to see that, something that is evocative of how they were used, I think would be wonderful. Certainly the star and the boulder. I don't know, are they putting the Walk of Stars back on the sidewalk in front of?
Yes, they will be.
So that could go back almost to where it was. So that would, I think that should go back to as close to where it was. And then I don't know what the fountain was that Tracy was referring to. That could perhaps go almost any place inside the park, but the only observation I have, if there's some way to place those gate posts at some sort of an entrance someplace, that would be kind of cool. And I'm all for the letter to the council.
Well, it is here, and we all have a copy of it too, so I would ask the board, perhaps today, to read the letter, add your ideas to it, and then get me that, and then we'll give it back to Flynn and have Flynn comprise an official letter. I think that we are all very pleased, or should be pleased, that Mark Rios, who has some success in city parks under his belt, to create and design or to include these elements. During the city council meeting of a month or so ago, I think it was even held here, when Mark Rios did his presentation to the council. It was sort of in a town hall forum. I had a conversation with him about it, and you know, it's not his decision. The city needs to tell him to do this, and then he will include it. So I'm glad that we're going to copy Mr. Rios on this, but the city needs to instruct Mr. Rios and his firm to install these elements. Just today, I did not know about this portion of the fountain that apparently exists as well. But as much as Tracy doesn't want to be the new president of the Historical Society, she's the right person in the right place, because who else knows that even existed, or that it might still exist. So I'll welcome some more comments from the board.
Mr.
Linda,
Chair.
please.
I think this is a wonderful idea, and I think it's very, very important to the city of Palm Springs. However, that being said, I don't know, I have no clue of what else is out there hidden in a basement or a barn that could help us. Is there any way we can do an outreach via computer or, email to residents or something, asking them if they have something or if they know of something? I mean, like you said, if Tracy hadn't come in here and talked about
Yeah.
the fountain, and I don't know what's underground in La Plaza that could be of importance to bring out to the public.
Right.
Is there any way we can find out?
It's a good question. I mean, we are very fortunate to have the Historical Society that we do. Hold that thought. Because the directors and the presidents of the Historical Society have been a continuous line of citizens, and it is truly a great repository of information. When it's too involved of a story, but when the star for Nellie Kaufman was discovered abandoned in the basement of the Desert Fashion Plaza along with Sonny Bono's star, and that was in the newspaper a couple of years ago. Jerry Vogelsang knew that the spot that it had been removed from, which was sort of in front of the old restaurant there.
Louise's?
No, there was a...
Pizza Kitchen?
Right there where the old Bank of America building was now that got torn down. There were two restaurants there. There was a Pizza Kitchen and the one next door to it. It was there in the street. Well, only Jerry knew that that was not the original location of it. It had been further up the street. So there is a lot of that, and maybe some of it is anecdotal. Flynn, is there a way to do any kind of an outreach?
Being much newer to Palm Springs than the rest of you, I may be the wrong person to answer this, but it seems to me, based on some of the comments that I've heard at previous meetings and so forth, that number one, the family, I believe it's the Kiley family, who has artifacts, would be the first
And
group
she
that I would go to.
just mentioned it's Owen Kiley.
Correct. They would really be the first ones that I would go to in terms of any remaining artifacts from the property, and then secondly, the Historical Society would be our second point. I don't know necessarily that there's going to be things out floating in the community that the family would not be aware of, but they should be the first point of contact, I think.
Well, and I think on that note, the Historical Society, I think many of us know Kitty Kiley. Kitty Kiley has addressed the board over the last several years. So she's a Kiley, and I think that the Historical Society and the Kileys have a relationship. And as Tracy mentioned here today, she has had a conversation with Owen, and he will loan the gates to the city in perpetuity if they're displayed properly. So I think the letter is a good place to start, our letter to the council. So I welcome board member comments. Let's read this and add some comments to it. As I mentioned, the Palm Springs Preservation Foundation has written a great letter recapping commitments from Mr. Westman that were made over the last several years. And this is the right place to memorialize the Desert Inn, I think. So we'll take the letter and come back to you in a few days with some additional notes, but we'll use this as a basis.
Wonderful.
All right, thank you. Please.
Also, speaking of the outreach, which is really what we need to do, a couple ideas on that might be, we had an article in the Desert Sun requesting this because we might reach residents that normally we don't think of in our preservation groups, that we are looking for such. That might be one thing, and also going to each of the organizations and asking them to get the word out to the newsletter. I could certainly see Will Kleindienst might also have some ideas along that line. And as far as also the park is concerned, I was at Sunnylands the other day, and it reminded me again, they have all of those wonderful kiosks that have, amazing information on them about the history of Sunnylands. But, so if we were to be able to have a kiosk for out-of-town visitors to really be able to see a historical reference of Palm Springs, might be, and I know that may have some logistic things to it and concerned about, theft, or not necessarily maybe theft, but damage and so forth. But what a wonderful opportunity to capture the visitor that really wants to have a little bit of a glimpse about Palm Springs. So those are just a couple other things that just came off the top of my head. So.
Well, I think the idea of a kiosk would be excellent. Today with technology, if there were an app, if somebody were approaching the park and saw the gates and saw the marker and saw the star and were able to interactively see what the Desert Inn was like, and so it's another very good idea.
On that thought, I'll just note, I think, Mr. Newell, did you present to them the work that you had done in GIS on the mapping of historic sites?
Not yet.
Okay.
It's not finished.
One of the things that Mr. Newell is working on is in GIS doing essentially a tour of all of the Class 1 designated sites. This would be a link from the city's webpage where you could go into the map and it would take you from one site to the other with background information and photos on the site itself. So that's a project that's ongoing, and when we get to a point where it's a little bit more ready for public consumption, we'll bring that before you. But that's one of the things that you can use as a basis for the app, perhaps, is being able to take a tour of Palm Springs by visiting all of the Class 1 or Class 1 and Class 2 in this case, thinking of the Desert Inn sites that form an important part of our history.
All right, excellent. Any further discussion on item 3A? Or 3C, I mean? All right, excellent. Moving on. Board member comments. No?
I have one.
Please.
I would like to draw your attention, this is a new book that just came out. I have one of the first copies. It's called New House, Old House. These projects are absolutely inspirational because it's taking old historic properties with new additions, but with different styles attached, and the projects are beautiful. They are mainly from the East Coast, some from England, some from California. And if every realtor should have this book, because when a house can be designated historic without the owner wanting it, these are examples of what can be done. And I'm going to give one to Louise Hampton.
Who's the author, please?
Mark Crystal.
It's an amazing book.
M-A-R-K?
M-A-R-C-K-R-I-S-T-A-L. And they do have it on Amazon.
I think it is a perfect example, Dan, what you were talking about. Recently, we had the Marito Place property come to us, and there was all that discussion. This could be an inspiration to a homeowner and to the realtors as well, because it certainly does. There's some just amazing examples in there. They're just really, it's a very stimulant kind of a thing.
It is, and I also think, like if the HSPB is going to do a project that reaches out to the realtors, that we were talking about for maybe in the fall.
Right.
If this book or some of these projects could actually be shown even at a presentation like that, I think it would change. It's inspirational. It is. I've never seen anything like it.
I haven't either.
Dan,
amazing.
I
Yes.
would task you with creating the presentation, not unlike Dick's presentation this morning, using some really fine examples, because a picture still is worth 1,000 words.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I love before and afters. I mean, you're the before and after king over here.
Mr. Chair?
Please.
Would it be appropriate for the planning department to purchase a copy and maybe encourage the planning department, the commissioners, to look at that every now and then when they have a project come in front of them?
Certainly.
Couldn't hurt.
Thank
That's
you.
a very good idea. Yeah. All right. Any other board comments? Vincent, please.
Mr. Chair, I noticed, I got a notice that on June 21st, the city council will consider the nomination for the Racquet Club. So I don't know if we can attend that. Well, I'm a basically neighbor owner adjacent to it. So they notified the surrounding, the area, the radius. So it's coming up on June 21st.
All right, good to know. Good to know.
Gary, I have.
Please.
So, a couple of quick things, segue from the book and the content. I attended the California Preservation Foundation conference last May. We had our financial incentives for realtors workshop. Overwhelming success. We had over 70 people in attendance. It was one of the best attended sessions at the conference. They were very happy. It was great. I certainly think it's something, and that would actually, we didn't really cover that kind of content, but, and we had a hard time covering all the content we did in 4 hours, but that would be a great addition. You know, it would make it longer, but that would be a great addition to the content. CPF was very happy. They're committed to doing something here. We just need to figure out when and where and how. And we certainly have the format down. But
Dick, it could be, as you begin to work on the HSPB event for next year, we could have a segment and even call it, is the author perhaps somebody that could be a guest speaker?
Good question. I don't know.
No, this could just be an amazing presentation and project that we could do
Yeah.
for next year.
It could. And
Be a
it
real
could even, it could
centerpiece.
even be the introduction. You know, if it's not one of the main one things on the program. But like, you know, the drone thing that was
Right.
last year was fantastic as an introduction. And that could even be done, you know, with the real estate event as well, if there's not time on the agenda. I don't know. These are just thoughts.
Don't you think the real estate is a standalone event if it's going to take 4 hours?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We've talked
Yeah.
about that in the
Yeah.
past,
Yeah.
and I thought we all
Yeah.
decided that it really needed to be a project
Oh, yeah.
that is a standalone, where we invite the realtors to this seminar. And I mean,
well, and the folks at Modernism Week have expressed a willingness for our being able to tag on to one of their 2 events. So we certainly could have it in conjunction with either the fall or the February event. So that's something, and that gives us whatever 4 or 6 months to figure it out.
So we would do that with Modernism Week.
It would either, just be at the same time coincidentally, or we could do something in conjunction with them. I think
in
they're open
conjunction
to.
would be great.
Yeah, they're open to it.
question of staff. Would we be allowed to get a sponsor who might provide lunch for the realtors and do this 4-hour seminar?
I
Or is
think we would
that-
prefer
no?
that we use city funds for that if we are going to provide lunch.
Well, the budget's coming up.
Budget's already been approved.
Oh, it has?
Yeah.
Ooh, we're early.
So they did charge $30 a person, which I personally was concerned about, but it didn't stop 70 people plus from attending. So the 30 times 70 would give us funding for, that was mostly, we will have higher expenses here because all the people who participated there we're already there. There are some local people, we could either, PSPF or the museum or somebody we could find to staff the panel. So there might not be too many people from CPF. We'd have to fly into town, maybe only one. So that would keep the expenses down there.
We might be able to get one of the organizations also to do this.
Yeah,
To get the realtors
maybe PSPF would pay for it.
Might be something that we could also do.
Great.
But I think we could use this in multiple ways if we were to do this. Dan.
I have one other quick addition.
Yeah.
So I went through 2166 West via Lola that I just wanted to put on everybody's radar. It's a 1940s John Porter Cluck eclectic Spanish that he started actually in 1938. Still owned by the original family, but the Boyd family who built it, who was one of the original mayors of Palm Springs. It is an escrow. I am extremely concerned about it. I don't really know what we can do about it at this point, but it is a 1,600 square foot house on a 16,000 square foot lot in Las Palmas. It's pretty much untouched. There are a couple of, actually really two minor additions that could literally, one of them being they covered up the original garage door. The original garage door is still there. They just covered up the original garage door, and then the other one is they added this little closet thing. But the house sits almost exactly as it was in 1940, and my concern is, it sits on a 16,000 square foot lot in the nicest part of town, and the highest and best use of this is to demo this. And I understand that if it were demoed, it would come before us and we could have some exchange of ideas at that point. But what happens if it doesn't come before us and someone says, hi, I would like to not demo this. I'll leave a wall and add 5,000 square feet onto this house. My understanding is there's really nothing that the city can do about that. So much like Merito, this house is absolutely in jeopardy the exact same way as that house is, and this house, in my opinion, is much more significant than Merito is, and so I would encourage us to think about if there's any other action we might want to take to help preserve this house.
Do you know Scott Lyle?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd start there. Let Scott know, perhaps that we discussed it at the board today, that if he needs to educate the buyer, we're happy to help assist in educating the buyer. But you're right. It's leaving that one wall or leaving that fireplace that qualifies it as a remodel and not as a demo. Yeah. Well, thank you for bringing it to our attention, but talk to Scott. He's pretty sympathetic. I mean, he's an old Palm Springs family.
There's drawings and photos. There was a wealth of data in the house. It was amazing. All the original drawings are there. Photos of construction are all there. So whoever is buying it, I don't know who's in escrow, but whoever is buying it has a full wealth of knowledge and understanding of what the significance is of the house.
Well, it seems that all of those artifacts should certainly be preserved and not discarded. So, will you follow up with him?
Yeah, I'll give him a call.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe we should take Scott one of those books.
Scott's on our
I'll
side.
buy it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Scott's on our side.
it isn't really Scott. It's
whoever
more
the
so
new buyer
Well, I mean,
is.
to give to the buyer.
Yeah.
Any other board comments? I had a question. How are remodel going over at the city council? Have you been a part of it, have seen it, or?
I'm there every day, but I haven't seen it. I know that sounds odd. They are working on the remodel. Again, we hope to have it finished in September. As you're aware, projects generally take a little bit longer than you anticipate. Speaking of that, for our schedule, we are going to be back here at the Convention Center for our July meeting. In August, we are dark.
Yep.
And as soon as I have information on our September meeting, I'm hoping it's going to be in the large conference room again, but if there's an alternate location, I'll let you know as soon as we have word on that.
Do you know of anything coming up? Since we put the stay of demolition on the Crocker Bank, that was in June, or excuse me, that was in May.
Correct.
Is that going out to?
Yes, we have one proposal back. We're still waiting to hear from 2 other firms
Okay.
before we award a proposal.
All right.
So we're working on that as quickly as we can.
Any other board comments? Dick?
On that note, would it be possible for any staff to have conversation with I understand the CEO of the In-N-Out Burger is evidently, she's very pro in doing, good things, if you will. And I'm just wondering if it would be wise to have a discussion of some type with her, so that, again, can we approach it as more of a team instead of being adversaries on this?
Yeah, we have been in touch with the representatives from In-N-Out Burger, and we'll have continuing discussions with them.
Oh, good.
Good.
So there is
Okay.
conversation.
Yes.
Good. Staff comments?
I
Staff report?
have a couple of things for you. First, on the theater subcommittee, we don't have a date yet for our next meeting. I am working with Councilman Roberts. If you'll remember from our last subcommittee meeting, he needed to touch base with his counterpart, Councilman Mills. And so as soon as I have a meeting date for the theater subcommittee, I'll get in touch with you all and give that information to you. Secondly, I wanted to make you aware, you may have seen on a recent city council agenda that the airport expansion is underway. They have awarded funds for design of that. A preliminary design was presented to the city council, let's see, either the last meeting or the previous meeting. The proposed design does not impact the west facade of the building, which is designated as a Class 1 site. The proposed renovation is to the lobby, the ticketing wing, and they are proposing not to touch the facade at all. It will be interior improvements, and then, as you'll see from the second drawing that I have there in the package, they will be expanding off of the back side or the east side of the ticketing wing to include baggage facilities. But again, they are not going to be doing anything to the front facade of the building. So I just wanted to make you aware of that because they aren't touching the front facade of the building. This is not something that would come before the HSPB, and the expansion is only to the rear of the building, which is not impacted.
And I remember, I do, that the restoration of the columns on the west facade.
We had talked about that.
Yes, that I'm pretty certain Mr. Nolan said that when this project began on the interior, that those columns could be restored or would be restored, so.
I had had that conversation with him as well, and it sounded like they were going to attempt that originally, but based on the budget that they have to work with, unfortunately, that's not going to be incorporated as part of this phase. This is only the first phase of several improvements, so as we look at other phases, I'll continue to have those discussions with him in terms of how we might take those back to their original condition.
Okay.
And that is everything that I have.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Well, just praying I'll see you in July,
From, why wouldn't you?
because it's a review.
Oh, I just saw that. When did you?